Welcome to How to Be a Journalist. I'm Plamdi Mbungu, and today we'll be recording a special episode with 4 leading podcast journalists, live from News Associates' 10th Annual Journalism Conference, JournoFest, at the Twickenham Stoop. JournoFest brings together News Associates and the School of Journalism trainees for a day-long festival of high-profile speakers and special guests from the media industry, and this rendition was without a doubt our biggest yet. But without further ado, let's head straight to JournoFest to hear from our all-star lineup of speakers. I'm very, very pleased to be here right now. You've had a lot of time with Graham Dudman today, but now you get Plam. So essentially, I'll start introducing my guests. So, to the left of me, I have BuzzFeed's head of O&O and Seasoned Sessions presenter and producer, Hanifah Rahman. Come on. And then we also have PoliticsJOE junior political correspondent, Laura Beveridge. The Sports Agent's executive producer, Adonis Pratsides. And creative director and Dansplaining co-host, Jordan Rason. Okay, so essentially, let's get straight into it. So I will start with Laura. Essentially, you are the most recent News Associates graduate on this panel right here and graduated back in 2023. So in your current role on the podcast, what were the main lessons from your NCTJ course that still stuck with you every single day at your current day job?
Probably how not to libel or defame someone is the most important lesson from media law. Spotting news lines, I guess, is really important because we are a political podcast. You're always the day before looking for what's going to be the top story that everyone's talking about tomorrow morning. So being able to find news lines, identifying clips from longer interviews that we want to react to, those are all really important lessons.
And you feature quite a lot on the PoliticsJOE YouTube account, and you're also on the Spotify account, and you feature quite heavily on the TikTok as well. So would you say that a focus on being a multimedia journalist is something that is important in the current day industry?
I think it's super important because I think I can only speak from my own experience, but I know from a lot of my friends' experience as well, that you're expected today to be able to do so much more than just write. You need to be able to be a full mobile journalist, so be able to film, be able to edit, and these are things that I kind of just taught myself how to do as well. A lot of YouTube tutorials for how to use Adobe Premiere Pro were watched, so I think being able to be that fully rounded social media, print, video, podcast is becoming increasingly important.
Yeah, most definitely. I know for a fact in a couple of days' time, next week, Adobe Premiere Pro will be my best friend, and I will be speaking to absolutely nobody in the office because I'll be in my corner editing this podcast episode. So now I want to bring it over to Adonis. So could you tell us a little bit more about your time currently with the Sports Agents as the executive producer and how you came across the role?
The idea was born before I joined. It was a global original idea to, I guess, build on the enormous success of the news agents and follow a trend I guess we're seeing across the podcast landscape of kind of broadening the sections of the industry that you can kind of really hone in on and building on that audience and growing that audience. And they wanted to do that with sport, which was obviously a sensible next step. They brought in 2 of, I guess, I would imagine most people would agree, the best in the business in Gabby Logan and Mark Chapman to front that. And what they wanted to create was something, I think, quite unique in the field, in that a lot of sports podcasts have their niche, have their kind of their experts, and they speak to maybe a small portion of the sports fans out there, and do something quite ambitious in creating something that appealed to everybody who loves sports, maybe some people who don't like sport, but do it in a way where you're finding stories which transcend maybe the particular discipline or particular sport itself and speak to people I had worked with Mark Chapman during my time at The Athletic. He really kindly suggested me for the role, and then I was in. As soon as I heard the idea, I couldn't wait to get started.
Yeah, and then I'm going to bring it over to Jordan. So essentially, you have been like Danny's left-hand man on the as co-host of the Dansplaining podcast. Tell us a little bit more about how that podcast even came into fruition and how the two of you grew it from ground up.
So I was the creative director of a show called PAQ. It was a YouTube fashion show where Danny, my co-host, was one of the presenters on that. And on that show, we were trying to make fashion accessible to everybody. So we were working with quite high-end brands, but then putting it in a term for Gen Z and, trying to break that barrier that we'd always come across when we were trying to interact with fashion content. And we'd always have really great guests, but on a YouTube episode, there was a storyline going on, and we'd have this guest on, and we'd film with them for 2 hours and probably put about 30 seconds of the conversation in there. So when the show ended, Danny and I were chatting, and I think this is the worst thing people do. They're like, "Oh, me and my friends in the pub, what a great idea for a podcast." But we were like, "Well, actually, we really like having these conversations with people, and it does feel quite casual. Luckily, we've got access to some really great people because of what we were doing." So we decided to launch it, and I think the big thing for us was there was places like Business of Fashion, which was really, you had to know what you're on about. It was quite dry. And then there was some that were just super jokey, and we were like, we want to sit in the middle where you can actually learn something from it, but actually, if you're not into fashion, you can still listen to it and engage with it and just hopefully enjoy the conversations we're having. So yeah, we launched it, and I was saying I had a bit of a leg up because my co-host does have like a few 100,000 followers, so we were able to launch and go straight into charts. And as soon as you start doing that and you're new, it really, the algorithm does push you out quite a lot. So yeah, it was really like, and I think the thing is, it's with my best mate. So essentially, that's all we do is just chat like we would to each other, but with an additional person there.
Yeah, like obviously you have a little bit more of a media sort of adjacent background in comparison to Danny. So do you believe that the fact that you coming from, a media training and that helped you with building the proper dynamic with Danny, who is essentially like the PAQ member?
Yeah, for sure. I think in two ways. One is the dynamic on the podcast is I'm sort of like the straight man to his affable northern idiot. And then from actually just building up a real strategy and understanding how to look at sort of your numbers, what they mean, where you get drop off, how to work with brands, how to integrate, how to make money from a podcast, all of those things where I could add real value to that relationship. And that sort of thing where he could bring in the listeners and viewers, and I could help actually make it a real business and a real functioning thing, because if it was up to him, it probably just would never happen.
Yeah, of course. And in terms of a dynamic with their co-host, that makes a good segue to introducing a little bit more about Hanifah, who is obviously the presenter and producer of Seasoned Podcast with Ada and Etchi as well. So could you tell me a little bit more about that experience, producing and presenting that podcast that serves the Black community so well?
Yeah, so we started it in June of 2020 during the pandemic. And before that, it was just a 5-minute little kind of news round style video roundup. So we were doing that in our studio each week, just rounding up Black British stories that we'd seen that hadn't made front page of the news, but had been in the news that week. And then obviously during lockdown, we couldn't do it because we were in pandemic. But Ada and I are really good friends, so we were like, we can still talk. And then we did a little bit of research on just Googling how to make a podcast, looked at best mics to use, a couple of YouTube videos, and then we pitched it. And it was just a matter of ordering the mics, practicing, and making sure we were all legally sound, and then just going for it.
So the fact that that podcast came predominantly from the brilliant minds of you and Ada. So how did you go about really perfecting your craft and really getting the podcast to a point where it's so established as it is right now?
Honestly, I would say we did record maybe 4 or 5 practice ones, and then we were just we've got to do it. And our first couple of episodes, if you were to go back, and it's 200 episodes back, they're a little bit rough. But we just kept on like improving and putting them out. And it's a weekly podcast, so whatever we recorded, we had to put out. So we just powered through, really. And I think just practice makes perfect. Not perfect, but
yeah, of course.
Improvement.
So like on your 200th episode, you interviewed obviously Cynthia Erivo a couple of days before Wicked actually came out as well. How was that experience interviewing such a high profile guest as such?
It was amazing.
Yeah.
We all cried. But yeah, it was really emotional because obviously that's such a huge role for her, and then it happened to be our 200th episode, and it was just kind of showed how long the journey's been and what happens if you were given room to kind of just do your thing. The audience will show up, the people will want it, and they will listen. So yeah, it was really powerful.
Yeah. So then now I'll ask Laura. In the summer, there was this really, really big thing that happened in this country called the general election that you got to cover. So could you tell me about your time covering the general election with PoliticsJOE?
Yeah, that was a really intense time, but it was also so much fun. And I think really highlighted the best of what PoliticsJOE is, which is on the ground, outside of Westminster as well as inside of Westminster. And we were podcasting daily. It was a lot of early mornings, a lot of late nights. We did a live show as well, and as we were coming towards the end of the general election, interviewed so many MPs, so many candidates who now are MPs. I went across the country. I went to Rishi Sunak's constituency, and interviewed the Labour candidate who performed much better for a Prime Minister's seat than anyone would have expected. I went to the Isle of Wight, I went to York, just all over the country. We also were, myself and my colleague Eva Santina were in the spin rooms at the leaders' debates, which for me, being a politics nerd, that was like a dream come true to be in those rooms, which is the behind the scenes where everything happens. You've got all the spads running about, you've got their press people trying to get to talk. You're trying to talk to them, they're trying to talk to you. We live streamed that as well, and we're interviewing MPs live. So that was a really highlight of my time at PoliticsJOE.
Yeah, like when I was researching you, I saw that you visited Luton as well and did a couple of interviews there and absolutely made the hometown look horrible.
That wasn't my intention, but we were. Andrew Tate had just been allowed to leave Romania, and I went to Luton to ask if the people of Luton were proud of Andrew Tate.
I promise we do not claim him, and I know Tassina as well. He agrees with me. So then, now I'm going to pass it over to Adonis. So with your time at the Sports Agents and beforehand at The Athletic, you have won quite a few awards for the podcast that you have produced. So the big one that I can see is the Indonesia Stadium disaster that won an award. Could you tell me about the process of you working on that podcast as a producer?
The producer takes way too much credit for those sorts of things. The journalist was Adam Leventhal, a brilliant reporter for The Athletic who identified a story that wasn't receiving enough attention by virtue of the fact that it was the largest football stadium disaster in history. He recognised the way that it would resonate with a UK audience in particular, given our history with Hillsborough, and went out there and did some amazing reporting. Really told the story, spoke to some incredible people, got really right to the heart of it. And my job after that was just to bring it to colour, was just to bring it to life, was just to help you put yourself in the shoes of the people at the heart of the story in a way that an article sometimes is limited. I can, by virtue of sound design and all of the other production flourishes, just really immerse you in the story. And it was a really difficult project to make, something I'm really proud of. And Adam is the guy that deserves all of the credit there, and all of the wonderful people that we spoke to. It was something I'm very proud of.
In terms of like covering a story as such, it can, because it's quite an emotional one and people, essentially lost their lives. How do you go about doing it in a way that is obviously truthful, but also sensitive as well, and also engaging as well, because it's a podcast.
That's absolutely it. I think that's the line that was the hardest to tread as a producer. Was you are, I think, as a journalist, you have the desire to not sensationalize, but you've got to find the most engaging parts of that story, but doing so in a way that isn't insulting when it comes to, you know, a story where it involves so much death. So I think as you're doing it, as you're receiving it, and obviously bouncing off people, brilliant people that I work with, to kind of get an idea of how this is going to be received. You know, there's times when you're editing where you're really feeling it, and it actually takes a lot out of you, and maybe you're moved to tears, and then you're saying to yourself, well, is that the emotion I'm trying to evoke? And am I doing that in a responsible way? And when you find that line, I think you've created something quite beautiful.
Yeah. I'm going to bring it over to Jordan now. So on the Dansplaining podcast, you have interviewed, obviously, the PAQ boys. So you've interviewed Dexter, and you've also interviewed Koji Radical. And these are people in the music and fashion sort of realm who are quite known. How do you go about essentially making them as comfortable as they possibly can when they're on the podcast?
So we debated the idea of having a studio, and we actually have decided we actually do it in Danny's flat. I think that sort of setting automatically, you know, they come in and like sit down and watch telly while we're setting stuff up, and if they want food, like just deliver it. And it just, from the moment they walk in, it's a bit ramshackle in some ways, but they also know that there's a reason we're doing it. And I just think, so my co-host Danny is just like the nicest human being, and he can just disarm someone straight away and like put them at ease. And then, so we build in, he does a lot of the talking at the start to really like lay the groundwork of like, this is not hard-hitting gotcha journalism, you know, it's a bit of fun. And then I'll sort of start building in some sort of deeper questions, you know, try and find some information that's not been got before. But I think the dynamic between the two of us helps that, where, you know, it's like they get that what they're doing is fun, but there's also seriousness to it with the both of us adding those different elements.
Yeah. Like, I think what comes across is very much the fact that you guys are friends. It just comes across as quite a natural rapport that comes through. So I think that's probably one of the good things. And to be fair, I do listen to the podcast as well, so I'm not going to sound like I'm glazing too much or anything like that. But but I'll pass it over now to Hanifah as well. So in terms of the reason why and the main motive of Seasoned Sessions being a podcast is very much to shed light on black stories that wouldn't necessarily get the opportunity to have that shine. What are the main challenges you have faced in trying to do so in your time running the podcast?
During running the podcast? Yeah. I'd say it's difficult. We use social media quite a bit to kind of gauge what the black community, the black British community are talking about. And I would say sometimes fact-checking can be difficult because we'll see a news story that's been reported by mainstream media, commentary on, say, X, for example, and then we have to then go and do our research and make sure we know what's facts and what's a rumour and what's opinion, and make sure that it's all very legally sound, because we have to make sure that we know what we're talking about, basically, because, yeah, there's things that I don't think we've ever put out anything that's been fake news, but that's a big worry for us.
Yeah. And then to Adonis. So are there any, in terms of if you had the opportunity to go back in time and be on the other side, so instead of being on the stage, you are a NCTJ trainee again on a sports course or a fast track course, and you're very much looking to get into sports journalism, how would you try and replicate your career right now to get, to a position like you have now? Putting you on the spot there. I get it.
Come on, bro. I honestly, I think a lot of things, as you will all find, comes down to timing, luck, and just kind of setting a consistent bar for yourself, or setting a bar rather for the quality of the work that you want to produce, and hitting that as consistently as you possibly can. If you deliver over and over and over again, I really do believe that on merit you will continue to find these opportunities, these doors will open, and then having maybe the courage, or maybe you'll walk through them accidentally, but doing that, forcing yourself maybe out of your comfort zone at times to do those things. I think the News Associates course for me was that, because I wasn't sure I wanted to be a journalist. I knew I wanted to be in this space, and I wasn't sure where I would end up within it, but it was an amazing experience, and I think throwing myself into it as I did was the best decision, because I learned so much and gained, as we were saying earlier, Plum, like an appreciation for what you guys do has helped me in the role that I've ended up being in.
Yeah. And Laura, very recently you got a promotion to junior political correspondent. So could you tell me a little bit about the new responsibilities that this new role has given you?
Yeah, I guess it's so I was hired at PoliticsJOE as an assistant producer and then junior producer of the podcast, but it also involved helping out producing my colleagues' videos as well. In my new role, I am no longer producing the podcast, but guesting on the podcast. And then as well as that, I'm also reporting and front-facing my own videos as well. And I will be looking quite closely into the housing crisis and how that's affecting young Brits in like a new series on the PoliticsJOE YouTube channel called Rent Seeking. And we just recorded our first episode of that, which is about a girl that lives in an abandoned hospital as a property guardian, and it's looking at kind of quirky living situations that people have been put in because of the rental crisis.
Okay. And Jordan, so essentially Dansplaining's focus very much is to make high fashion and just fashion in general more accessible. So during your time on the podcast as well, are there any myths that you want to dispel about the fashion industry?
I mean, it's a bit rubbish, if I'm honest with you. Working in it for like 10 years, you know, we're talking about some really like amazing things that these guys are all doing, and then I'm talking about like the second biggest polluter in the world. But I think there's like this thing where people think everyone wants to gatekeep and everyone's a bit bitchy. And actually, my experience is if you go and talk to people and you engage with them, it's a lot more open. That business, that sort of world is a lot more open than it seems or it's portrayed as. I think everyone thinks that, I think it's a very like old view of like the 90s fashion world, which it really isn't that anymore. There are still, you know, the Kate Moss-esque parties from the 90s, but I think now people are so much more aware of what they're doing, how they're representing themselves and sort of their communities, and you know how they can better the world through what they're doing. And I think that's the biggest thing for me is a lot of people are using fashion as a vehicle to talk about other things, whereas before it was just like, here's some nice clothes on some really skinny people. Yeah.
Okay, and before I begrudgingly allow the JournoFest faithful to ask you any questions, I will have just a couple of quick one-line Fast and Furious questions for you guys to answer if you can. So these ones, they're helpful for trainee journalists essentially. So I'm going to start with Jordan and we're going to come towards me. So Jordan, and this is a really, really important question. I'm not going to ask what your favorite color is. Are you an extrovert or are you an introvert?
I'm one of those introvert extroverts where I force myself to be an extrovert.
Okay, I get it. Same here, but it's not about me. Go on, Adonis.
Yeah, I am definitely an introvert masquerading as an extrovert.
Mm-hmm.
I would say the same. I'm an introvert that really likes people.
Yeah, I'd say I'm a very loud introvert.
I guess we're all ambiverts on this stage right now, so that works. So then next one, Jordan, I'm going to press for the answer as well. Who would your dream interview be if you haven't interviewed them already? Dead or alive?
So I used to work in YouTube, and that's where the show existed in the fashion world. And there should be a really cool answer here, but it's Emma Chamberlain. Like watching her journey from making these like really weird vlogs to being the face of these high fashion brands, and I just think she's a massive vibe.
Yeah, valid. And Adonis?
Michael Jordan.
For sure. No?
Gordon Brown.
Timothy Chalamet, who I did interview.
Which you actually did do, which is fair play. So, Jordan, let's say you had the opportunity to interview Emma Chamberlain after this. So she's waiting in the car park and you're going to go to a cafe and interview there. What would you do to prepare yourself for your interview with Emma Chamberlain? Listen to music?
Well, if I've got to run out straight away and do it, I think the great thing about our podcast is it's a bit more like colloquial, which is chatting. We do research a lot of our guests and deep dive into it, but I suppose just start that convo off. The thing is, the podcast isn't about me, it's about her. So just get that story, get her talking, and just let her do her thing, because she's a genius.
Yeah, of course. And Adonis, like Michael Jordan's in the car park.
Yeah, well, I have the luxury of being able to lean on two brilliant interviewers and not have to worry about that too much. But of course, 5 minutes alone composing myself before I meet him, and then obviously all of that research, which does fall on the production team a lot of the time, to kind of work out what story we can tell that that speaks to our identity, is maybe original, or as original as it can be, with someone who's done so many. And yeah, making sure my presenters are armed with everything they need to make that the best use of our time.
And Gordon Brown as well.
I think it's like what Adonis was saying, is sometimes with people that have been interviewed so much, it's finding that new angle, that new question that they haven't been asked about. And also, I guess when you're interviewing active politicians, there's like a duty of accountability there as well. So you have to make sure that you're asking the right questions that your audience wants to know the answers to.
Yeah, of course. And you've already interviewed Timothy Chalamet, but let's say June 3 is coming out or something like that. What are you doing to prepare for that interview?
Well, I've already done my research, having watched the film, so make sure I know back catalogue, but also try and link some of the talked about themes of June 3 with some of the things that he's spoken about to try and get that rapport going. And yeah, what basically everybody said, find a question that they haven't been asked before, so they get to talk about something new.
Yeah, fantastic. And with that, now I will open up questions to the JournoFest faithful. So if you've got any questions, I will start with you in the back, because you asked first.
In terms of getting into like creative forms of journalism, so I'm thinking mainly like music and entertainment, would you say it is better to focus your energy on trying to get a job at an organisation, or working on personal projects and trying to build up a portfolio of stuff to show for it?
I would say it depends on circumstances. So it's really important to have that portfolio and be able to build that portfolio as much as you can. But you need to make money. So if you either work part-time whilst working on the portfolio, but then if you're working with an organisation, it does give you that kind of foundation for training, but you might not be able to make the kind of content that you're passionate about. So kind of setting your goals ahead long term, but constantly working on the personal projects as much as you can whilst taking the skills from the workplace.
You kind of mentioned that it was you, Adonis, said, but before you met Michael Jordan, you would take a lot of time to kind of compose yourself a little bit. In those sort of situations where you're going to interview someone or meet somebody that you really admire, you're a really big fan of, or they're just a really big name, how do you sort of separate being really nervous and, you know, that kind of thing from actually being able to do a good job?
I think it gets easier over time, but ultimately you're there as a professional, you're there in your professional guise, and I think that's just a decision I guess you have to make for yourself. I think there are certainly a lot of athletes that appreciate the ego boost, but ultimately if you want to produce, you know, the best bit of content or article, whatever it might be, with that small use of time, you're only wasting time if you're asking for pictures and things like that. And ultimately, you know, you keep doing that and you will get more and more opportunities to be in these sorts of spaces where maybe there is a quiet moment where you can do the fanboy and fangirl thing, but that's probably not the time for it.
So thank you for chatting to us today. We were wondering, as people who have just started a podcast called The Good, the Bad and the Trending, what are some common mistakes that you see from people starting a podcast?
I suppose the first thing is like not loving what you do. You have to be super passionate about what you're talking about, because it is tough. we were talking about this earlier, like when you're putting it out and you're not getting any sort of like feedback back, you know, you're getting low number of views, it can be a bit like soul destroying at times. So if you're doing it for yourself and for no one else, you're going to keep doing it. And the big thing for us, we were like, you need to get through the first 10 episodes because they're going to be the hardest ones. And once you've done that, you start getting your routine, you start understanding what you're doing. But I see so many people like put one episode out, sort of sit on it for a few weeks, put another episode out, stop, then go, oh, I'm going to do that again. And you just need to build up that rhythm and make it part of your routine, essentially.
I think utilising social media as well to post clips, your best clips from your podcast is a really good way to get it out there and help build an audience and direct them towards the long form.
Can I jump in on that and just say, I think a lot of podcasts try and imitate. And I think what we've got up here with the three wonderful people I'm alongside is that what they've done is very original and very personal to them. So understanding who you are and who you're trying to speak to, I think a lot of podcasts out there just try and imitate what already exists, and I think they fail when they do that.
Obviously, a big part about getting into the industry is rejection. So I just wanted to ask how you deal with rejection, if you have been rejected.
I suppose I can come at this from two ways. One, from my sort of full-time job where I work in the creative industries. And when I first started, I just took it so personally. And it's going to sound so lame and so obvious, but you just have to learn to sort of separate those two things, because sometimes you'll feel like you've done the best thing, you've applied for a job or a role, and you're like, this is perfect for me, and you'll get no feedback why. And I think that's something, actually ask for feedback, because they have to give you it. But it's going to sound really lame, but you have to keep getting rejected to build up that barrier and that thicker skin. But eventually, you know, it will come through, and if you're passionate about something, you know, you will end up in the right place, I think.
Hi, Laura, I guess this is more of a question for you. Having graduated semi-recently, what advice would you... I guess the question is, how exactly did you land the role? Did you already have some podcast experience beforehand? And what advice would you give for someone looking to get into your role?
It feels really weird to be giving advice because I still feel like a student myself. Like I'm only almost 2 years into the role, and I'm still learning I feel like I'm still learning how to be a journalist every single day. And luckily, I have some very amazing mentors that I work with. So I had edited my student paper and done a lot of stuff with print because I always thought I was going to be a print journalist. My only real exposure to social media journalism and digital journalism had been through the News Associates course. And I do have to say, I kind of was in the right place at the right time and got very lucky. I had written to PoliticsJOE for work experience, and at the end of my work experience, I was offered a job there. And I learned everything on the job about how to be a digital journalist. But I think those skills, and a lot of them you can teach them yourself. Like how you have a phone, you've got TikTok, like you can make news TikToks, explainers, go out and chat to people, cut it down, and put it on TikTok. Like those. We all have access to social media journalism. So I guess, have I answered the question there? I hope I have.
I guess I just wanted to ask for any of you who had an answer. How do you know when to stop researching, especially when you're interviewing someone like quite prolific, I guess, and who has a lot of background behind them, and that the audience, you know, would obviously know a lot about themselves? How do you know when to stop kind of digging into their past and like knowing when you have good questions to ask?
I tend to go down quite a few different rabbit holes, so that's quite a difficult question, but I would say it depends on the angle of what you're going for. So say knowing what your finished product is going to be for the interview, and then having a look at what they've said before. So in terms of like knowing about their past is one aspect, but looking at other interviews they've done and seeing what they've said. And I think when you've got questions that don't overlap with what you've already seen or read, then I think that's when you know when to stop. And you've got enough questions and you feel that you can fill the time, then you can go for it.
In the blue in the middle there.
So this is from Rosie from our remote course, and it's for Laura. She said, how have you found transitioning to a more public-facing role, particularly with regard to online response giving, the hate backlash I know Ava receives?
I'm assuming that's about Ada with our podcast. So because obviously we're two black women talking about various sensitive topics, so we often find ourselves going quite viral on TikTok, which brings haters, and we also unfortunately have to moderate our comments as part of our responsibility. And I'd say it's just really trying to separate yourself from the hate comments and being able to kind of get that feedback from the actual fans. And I think that's what we were saying. One thing that's quite good about podcasting that you don't see in other aspects of journalism is that you have that feedback, that direct feedback from dedicated fans. So we can focus on that and kind of tune out the hate comments who are from people who aren't even listening to the podcast. They've just seen a clip and don't like what's being said, so you don't really take it personally. But yeah, it's not great.
Hi, my name is Sharon. I'm on the remote course. This is a question for anyone. When you speak to camera, sometimes it can be a bit daunting. Maybe you don't say the right things or do the right things. How do you become more eloquent and, I guess expressive at the same time while you're on camera?
So I think it's a skill like anything else. And I think, because I recently went from being very much behind the scenes to in front of the camera, and I watched the first few times that I was on camera, and the amount of times I said the word I was annoying myself listening to myself back, and people in the comments were commenting that as well. So I think just in the way that becoming a good writer is a skill, and it takes a lot of practice and it takes a lot of time. Becoming a good speaker and a good presenter is definitely a skill that takes practice and takes time, and I'm learning every single day the secrets of how to do it better.
The question is about working at BuzzFeed. Obviously online it looks very creative. I was just wondering how the environment is like in real life.
So it is quite similar to what you see on the outside. It's a very small team, and so it's 6 of us editorially. And the good thing about it is everybody's really passionate about what they do, entertainment. So we just share ideas and it's very fun, but it is quite high pressure being such a small team and having limited budgets. So we are very, very busy, but it's a fun environment for us.
Kind of following on to that question at BuzzFeed, you mentioned you had a bit of a limited budget, limited team. With it being such a global company, what's it like pitching, I guess, your podcast within that and turning something you love into something that's actually viable within the company?
So I would say that was actually a big advantage of being such a small team, because when we pitched it, so we're BuzzFeed UK, so our thing is separate for the US, even though we do talk to them. But we just pitched it to our managers, and they basically said, if you can find the time, then and you're delivering the content, then we can work with that. So that's the benefit of having a smaller team. It's more responsibility on us, but it gives more freedom. Hope that answers the question.
That's maybe more just a general question. I know you started talking about how we could start a podcast, and I think you mentioned with the mics and like a few materials. But I was wondering, so as us trainees, if we want to start a podcast, if you have any also best practices on where to post and which platform, and if any best practices we should know before publishing our first episode.
I'd say, firstly, like having the best equipment isn't a necessity. Like we used to shoot on like Sony A7Ss, and now we just shoot on an iPhone. So when people come in, they're like, oh, like I thought there'd be a big camera setup. And then in regards to that best practice, I think TikTok for me is amazing because you can really like A/B test a lot of content where you can put 3 variations of the same thing out and then utilize the knowledge you get from that and go, well, that's the one that actually blew up. That's the one I'm going to then put into Reels or like YouTube Shorts. And I think understanding where you can get these different streams from, like we used to get a fair bit from like Reddit, and but that's because there is quite a big fashion community within that space. So if you're, if you are operating in a space where there are these niches, whether it be like Tumblr or whatever, you going down those routes and just finding those little pockets of people that you're going to be able to engage with. Obviously the 3 big ones, Instagram, TikTok, and X. But we found a bit of success on YouTube Shorts because again, we had a bit of a background on YouTube. And again, if YouTube, then when the whole like TikTok thing was happening, we were like, well, if YouTube decides that they're actually going to just blow everyone out of the water, they can pay everyone loads of money and they can make YouTube Shorts huge. So just testing everything out, but TikTok for me has been the best one to test it all.
We use Anchor FM. Do you guys use that? Used to use Anchor, yeah. So that's a service that's run through Spotify, and you create an account and then you get your name and upload there, and then it puts everything onto Apple and all the various other places. So that just put in the whole long form out that's been really easy and useful for us there. And then everything that he said.
And there are so many good services that allow you to like Captivate, like Simplecast, where you can get real-time analytics and really pay attention to those and pay attention to your audience and be receptive to the kind of stuff that they're engaging with and the stuff that they like less maybe when you're kind of honing the identity of the pod. And then I'd add video. I think video is becoming even more important. I think now if you're launching a podcast and you're not thinking about audio, I think you should be.
Also, just to add, I'd say set up a schedule of when you'll post and have enough material ready so that there's a regular routine from the beginning. And also think about, if you are doing video, having a space so there's brand recognition that you don't have to change throughout, because those things are pretty important for SEO and getting the audience.
I was just wondering do you have any tips on how to treat a story with the end product being audio rather than print? We have to produce radio packages and podcasts, and I was wondering how you might choose a story differently when you know it's something that people are going to listen to.
I think you are thinking about, I guess it's similar to an answer I gave earlier about activating audio for the other sense. What is going to sell this story and what is going to separate it from the words on the page that it would have been if you just wrote it? How is that different?
I think we do a lot of video as well, and I think when we are pitching video stories, we are thinking about the visuals first, and showing rather than telling is really important, I think, for video reporting, and that's something that I've just learned through doing it. And even things like if we're doing an interview with someone, rather than standing still, having them speak to us, why don't we, walk around their house and chat more casually, and having that dynamicness to the video, I think really adds a visual aspect that you don't have to think about when you're writing.
Okay, last few questions before I take it back from you guys again.
Hello. How do you make sure you craft a question so that you get really interesting information out of your guest? And find a kind of golden nugget of information.
I suppose everyone sort of mentioned it already in regards to when you're doing your pre-production, you're really understanding what you want to achieve. So with those questions, just giving them the room to sort of maneuver within it, and seeing, I personally like to let them sort of find their own way to the answer that I'm trying to get them to. And every now and again, you might need to just jump in and prod the right way and things like that. But as long as you know roughly the goal you want, I think they do a lot of the legwork for you, and just not being too prescriptive, not putting words in people's mouths. I think is such an easy thing to do if you want something, but but do you think this? And letting them work out what they want to say.
Yeah. And I'll add, actually, a skill is not jumping in too quickly with the next one as well, and almost putting that space there and being brave enough to maybe let it air for a second, let them kind of try and fill it themselves. I mean, I've spoken to a lot of footballers and they love to give you the quick 5-second and done. And if you are brave enough sometimes to just pause for that extra moment and force them to keep going, you might get something you might not have got.
So, especially with film and TV interviews that I've done, when I genuinely want to know the answer to their question, those have always produced really interesting answers. Whereas there's genuine curiosity and interest in the subject is just me wanting to know that personally, and then readers also then want to know, or listeners as well. So, in this part of the podcast, usually I like to ask people their favorite movie, favorite TV show. If you've actually watched the podcast, you'd know that I do that at the end of every episode. But because it essentially is recommendations for myself to watch just anyway. But I understand we are tight for time. So essentially we're going to get to my final question that I'll ask
all the four of you. So I will start with Hanifah and go towards Jordan this time, just to switch it up. So, Hanifah, so essentially, if you had one word to describe your career as of right now, and I mean the first thing to come up in your head, what would you say?
Say exciting.
Exciting, fantastic. Laura?
Fun.
Fun, yeah, that works. Adonis?
Lucky.
Lucky. And Tendon?
Yeah, I was going to say fortunate.
Unfortunate. Okay, thank you very much for coming and chatting with me on the first live edition of the How to Be a Journalist podcast, live at JournoFest. And as they said earlier, I'm the third person to do this and have this honor, so I'm going to be tapping myself on the shoulder. But with that, thank you very much, everyone. I've been Plamdi Mabungu, signing out.